So today I'll be talking about Gyo, Uzumaki, and Tomie by Junji Ito. I'm a huge fan of horror. That's something I made very explicit last time in my manga call. And I did actually haul these books as well, and I read them all very recently. So I thought I would just give you my thoughts on them. I hope I can pique your curiosity into maybe checking out more of Junji Ito's manga or just manga in general. I'll be going through these books in length order, from Gyo being the shortest to Tomie being the longest. So without further ado, let's start off with Gyo. So Gyo follows the story of Tadashi and Kaori, who are a couple who go to Okinawa. Just as a holiday, it just turns into an absolute fishy walking shit show. The story starts off with Tadashi scuba diving in the waters of Okinawa and coming across a few sharks. However, this incredibly fast creature zooms by him and it completely alarms him. As obviously if something is incredibly fast underwater, that means it is ridiculously fast over ground. After coming across this creature, Tadashi rushes over to the boat wherein his girlfriend Kaori is waiting for him, and she becomes incredibly scared because he is freaked out at whatever the hell was down there because he didn't even get to have a good look at it. I'm not going to go in and spoil the story because this isn't a spoilery review. This is just more so my thoughts on it. And I'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum and flag them when they do come about. Admire about Gyo is that it does definitely feel like a manga which talks about man's relationship with the environment. It shows the implications of what we do and what we research and how they can have consequences that reach further than we would have expected or even we could fathom. There is a huge element of mystery and there are so many unanswered questions, as is common with Junji Ito work. I say this even when I finished reading this, have a sense of anger because I was very content with the ending, even though I had so many questions. What I do really appreciate about Junji Ito is that he does leave things unknown. And usually when things are unknown, we tend to be more scared by them. One of the biggest issues I have with anime, manga, or movies and video games that try to fit into the horror genre is that they try too hard to explain things. When you leave things in a grey area, or at least with some answer or some opportunity for answers, or even like a bit of a biscuit trail, it feels way more gratifying to garner those answers, but it can take away from the fear we feel towards something. If we know how to act towards something, or at least where it comes from, it makes it more real. And though that realism can really help push forward the fear, I do feel like it does also take away the suspense of being around something you just will never be able to fathom or really truly understand. With Gyo, we do get an element of that, and we do get a good few answers, but we don't get the answers which lead from where things were to where they are now. And I think that's brilliant, as the story, very similar to Uzumaki, is more character focused. And though a lot of horror stories and suspenseful stories tend to be more drawn into talking about the aspect of the horror, it shows less of the effects on the characters. And Junji Ito is a very character-centric writer. He will make metaphors through his art as well as his subject matters to things and parallels to our own world, especially with Uzumaki, I'll be talking about in a bit, but with Gyo on allowing us to really relate to the characters and feel their fear. So we can really empathize. In contrast to the other two novels, Gyo really does talk about man's relationship with the environment. The focus on how we have tortured and the inhumane extremes to which humanity has fallen to for power really is portrayed in the novel. Despite everything, there is an overwhelming sense of romance, without giving too many spoilers away, within Kaori's trust in Tadashi. Even though he sometimes finds it hard to believe her, especially with her incredibly sensitive nose, and he just thinks that she's looking for reasons to be aggravated. Kaori is just so adamant in her love for Tadashi. You see it all the way through the novel, and it is so heartwarming in such a heart-wrenching tale about inhumanity and how humanity reacts to something that's unstoppable and robotic. We've been advancing in technology so much that seeing the clash between our own interference with the world and what's already there it definitely helps perpetuate the idea that this story is one to start a conversation between what we do to nature and the repercussions of what nature will do to us in return. One thing to definitely be noted is how well Junji Ito expresses motion. In this piece, due to the creatures being incredibly fast, there is a lot of importance put onto the idea of speed and motion and how slow we are as human beings in comparison to these creatures of mass destruction. Really trying hard not to give spoilers away. As manga is a 2D medium that doesn't have the motion attribute that anime, video games, and movies would have, Junji Ito does an excellent job at portraying this, especially with the swooshing of the creature. One of my favorite panels is actually the panel wherein Kaori is taking a shower and there is a lurking darkness that she glances over at. You can see the motion of the water, but you can also see the looming of the darkness. You can differentiate between those two lines, and I feel that Junji Ito is so good at helping stress where his audience's focus should be, also invoking the sense of claustrophobia. I definitely felt that claustrophobia way more in Uzumaki, but Gyo has a brilliant feeling of being overrun. There is no place to run because everywhere is consumed by these creatures and by nature. You can't escape nature. And just like that, we can't escape what we've done to nature. So it's either we actually begin to deal with these things, or we continue to run away from these things. Uzumaki! No, not Naruto. On most polls, Uzumaki is considered to be Junji Ito's best work. I really wish I didn't check that out and find that out beforehand, because I do feel like it definitely hindered my experience. I'll definitely mention that when I talk about the ending. But with Uzumaki, I can see a very clear relationship with Gyo, not necessarily story-wise. I personally didn't find any ties. More so on how we as human beings interact with nature, though it definitely is a transition between Gyo and Tomie. Gyo is very environmental heavy and Tomie is very humanity heavy in the sense that they are both commentaries on these extremes. Uzumaki kind of is the middle ground between the two, and I feel like it's a really good novel to start off with, or at least if you want to get an idea of what kind of Junji Ito work you're more interested in. Obviously his works are very character driven, but it really depends on what aspect you want to explore. Would you like to explore the more personality based, the sins of our society, which is a bit more Tomie, while Gyo is definitely a bit more what we do to the people and the things around us. Uzumaki follows the story of Hiya and her boyfriend Shuichi in the town of Kurozucho, which is a coastal town in Japan. The narrative, very similarly to Gyo, begins with the protagonist's first contact with the incident which begins the whole affair. So as Tadashi actually came across this incredibly fast fish, Hiya comes across her boyfriend Shuichi's father looking down at a snail. And obviously a snail's shell is in the shape of a spiral, which is Uzumaki in Japanese. The story seems like such a crazy concept that a spiral shape is haunting a town, but when you make comparisons to what already exists in the world, we can already think that that seems crazy to someone else. How some people can find that when the 13th of a month falls on a Friday, it's completely terrifying for some people. How some people equate triangles with evil, especially the Illuminati, so they completely avoid that symbol. Or seeing the number 666 anywhere being considered a bad omen. Because of these things, it doesn't necessarily seem that out of place that spirals themselves could actually be something to haunt someone. I personally think that it could potentially be a metaphor for curious mental spiral into decay. As the stories progress, there is more and more contact with these spirals, and sometimes they do read like one shot, but there is a consistent story. You do have the main protagonist, just like Gyo, and somewhat like Tomie. But the thing I found most intriguing about Uzumaki was how Junji Ito could create so many different situations surrounding the same shape. From the infatuation Shuichi's father has with the spiral shape, to Kiria's father becoming enamored with making pottery in the shape of spirals. There is also a lot of conversation on humanity itself, what happens to snails, I'm not gonna say, but how our own actions can lead to repercussions and a very dignified sense of karma. It's way more gratifying in this story, as there really seems to be a repercussion for people's negative actions, which we don't get in Tomie. Ito also does bring about an idea that the evil within us is brought out by these spirals. There are many examples of the evil within people being exaggerated by the spiral. In the chapter The Scar, the antagonist has a scar upon her head, which is in the shape of an eclipse, but whilst becoming more and more consumed by her vanity, it grows upon her face and it consumes her. Whilst in the chapter Medusa, we see this intense jealousy, which leads a friend of Kirie's to become an enemy, and feeling the repercussions of her actions of desiring more attention. Kirie didn't want the attention for what's happening to her hair, which is completely wicked, and you can actually see it kind of on the cover. Meanwhile, when trying to chase for something someone already has with evil intent and out of jealousy, it can just lead to your own undoing. And that sense of repercussion, that sense of a cost for the negative things we do, plays a key part in this novel. It shows not only the cycle of good and bad and how what goes will come and continue going onward, but like the spiral shape, it is a continuous motion. The world will continue to exist. There will always be bad and good, and the actions we take more so define how our own lives are led rather than what happens later on. One of the most wonderful things I found in Uzumaki was the relationship between the two protagonists. Kirie and Shuichi are in love in a way that is not externally shown. However, their supportiveness and their protectiveness over each other, and despite everything that Kirie might consider as Shuichi's madness, she stays with him. A very good comparison between Tadashi and Kaori's relationship to Shuichi and Kirie is that the primary protagonists, Tadashi and Kirie, tend to ignore the feelings or the negative energies or the advice of their partners, which would be Kaori and Shuichi. But as the story progresses, they both become much more trusting and the relationships get stronger. Though I found in Uzumaki it was a lot more gratifying because we see more of that relationship, we see more of that trust, and how no matter what's going on with Shuichi, no matter his descent into becoming more and more depressed and more reclusive, Kirie does not let him go. However, I do find it quite upsetting in that there seem to be so many signs that Shuichi is so lonely, he's so depressed, and he's so out of it that his sense of normalcy comes from Kirie, and she just didn't act on it as much as she should have, in my own opinion. She did stand by him though, and I do definitely give her props for that, especially in the kind of world this is set in. You definitely get a sense of the greed in humanity in Uzumaki and the selfishness that people will pursue, as well as the roboticism of following rather than leading. One thing that actually shocked me that was similar in both Gyo and Uzumaki was how both the partners of the main protagonists want to run away at the very beginning. They want to leave the situation, but the protagonist avoids it, and by doing so, it leads to their subsequent undoing. An idea of you need to trust your partner, you need to be able to communicate with your partner, and it's quite sad that they develop that trust quite late. However, in the horror aspect, both mangas definitely are incredibly grotesque, as well as Tomie. Uzumaki brings the spiral shape into a form that one could never imagine. There are so many compromising and grotesque ideas that I honestly found haunting, but was so enamored by at Junji Ito's ingenious into coming up with these ideas of making the shape so haunting. From what happens to Shuichi's dad to what happens to Kirie's brother, Junji Ito thinks way beyond the box, and when it comes to the ending and how everything ties in from what is mentioned very early on, I found that comparison to be so shocking, and it was brilliant. I think one of the greatest things is to sow the seeds from the beginning and know where it's going to end, and Junji Ito very clearly has an idea of where things are going to end, even if he's not going to explicitly tell you what's actually going on. He makes it very clear what the ending will lead to be, and it really rewards rereading. One of my favorite chapters in Uzumaki was the Jack-in-a-Box, as it shows the pursuit of a boy obsessed with Kirie and how it leads to his own downfall, but also continues to torture him after certain circumstances. Not gonna spoil, it's really freaking good. That chapter is brilliant. But Junji Ito does explore other kind of sins, you could say. In the Black Lighthouse, Junji Ito criticizes curiosity, just as he criticizes jealousy in Medusa and he criticizes vanity in The Scar. And just like those instances, he also gives a shout out to bullying in The Snake. There is a overarching theme of repercussions in Uzumaki. For that, I really respect Junji Ito for what he created in the story. It was such a brilliant story, and just as I loved the sense of darkness and motion in Gyo, I adored the little tidbits of spirals strewn throughout Uzumaki and the genius ways in which Junji Ito can make a very simple shape seem so haunting. I don't even want to imagine what he could do with triangles and squares. Then again, I think I would love to read that. Please do it. And finally, Tomie. Tomie is my babe. She's why I've like put a dot there, like I'm trying to pretend to be her, you know what I'm saying? Like, look, we're twinning. Wait, is on the opposite? That eyes. Am I wearing this on the wrong one? I'm wearing it on the wrong one. I tried to do my makeup in the theme of like these books. Don't know if it worked. Clearly it didn't because I failed. So Tomie follows a somewhat demonic succubus female who basically can't die. She's undying, and from the very first chapter, spoilers if you want to hear them, Tomie is murdered by her classmates, some of which were incredibly jealous of her, some desired her but she rejected them, and also her teacher who she had an affair with, but due to him and a classmate, leading to an accident wherein she falls off a cliffside like a high edge, everyone basically decides to make a pact and kills her and cuts her body into little pieces, and the pieces strewn about everywhere. So when Tomie returns, everyone is incredibly shocked, and we don't know that revelation until a bit later on in that same chapter, but it is like, oh my gosh, now we get why everyone's freaking out. Then again, I feel like from the beginning, Junji Ito is trying to make us root for Tomie, as she has been so unjustly treated by those around her, and though it isn't necessarily a feminist novel, it does give me those vibes that can you blame the woman for coming back with a vengeance and with so much anger and with so much evil when these are the circumstances that led to her death, as it's the manipulation of a teacher against a student, of a grown man against a teenage girl, using her for sex and then throwing her aside, and the selfishness of the male classmate who was in love with her, and because of his selfishness, she dies. Everyone else's jealousy and everyone else's inner evils and their own fear to deal with the consequences of this accident has left me as a reader personally feeling no remorse for these characters. They don't deserve any, and I do hope they all rot in hell and Tomie makes them suffer. There are definitely some very questionable moments in Tomie. One chapter, for example, for me, which I found very, very questionable, was The Boy. The Boy is a chapter that really had a very unnerving effect on me, not only because it kind of deals with the idea of pedophilia, but because of the juxtaposition of Tomie, who is essentially an underage teenage girl who was murdered because of the circumstances surrounding her relationship with her teacher, alongside a little boy being manipulated by what he thinks to be a beautiful woman who cares about him. It made me feel very uncomfortable. Obviously, pedophilia is bad, but they're both children, and it's sad that they're both being put in these situations. And I really wish Tomie didn't manipulate this child, but I guess it just shows the depths of her evil. The later part of the chapter, we do see this child become more and more subservient to Tomie and desiring to be around her. And she tosses him aside for an older male, but only comes back. But when he's trying to go over it, she comes back into his life. And though you might think she came back for him, what she does do is actually steal his father, who becomes completely transfixed with her look that he disappears and is never seen again. Very last page, we're told that the boy becomes a criminal and is killed by lethal injection when he grows older. So it shows the repercussions of pedophilia. Even though it is Tomie who's causing this evil, and it does make me question her character more and more, I feel like this is Junji Ito showing the cycle of torture of these people who go through bad things. And I'm not trying to say that, oh, just because you've been through something bad, that means you can continue to do other bad things and lead to this negative. But I feel like it is very important to understand that we shouldn't allow situations like this to happen in the first place, and we definitely shouldn't be bystanders like all those classmates were in the first chapter to enable these evil things to exist, as it is we as the people who create these evils and let them permeate into our society. The overarching theme of Tomie is this desire for vanity. Tomie is incredibly good looking. We are told this from the beginning, but we definitely see it explicitly as Junji Ito's art style gets better. I think this is one of his first work. You can definitely see the difference between the very beginning, where the art style isn't necessarily as good as it is in the later chapters, where you can definitely see he's established his unique way of drawing manga, which is the same style he uses in Gyo and Uzumaki. And because of this, the aspect of beauty is really important. Tomie is always seen as beautiful, so I feel like the contrast between the beauty of Tomie as this gorgeous teenage girl and these creatures and the grotesque things that happens to her in the stories really helps accentuate the difference between the two, as well as the two extremes of society, and sometimes essentially what is hiding underneath. Tomie is not a good person. She's never trying to be a good person. Even when you think she is, she's not. She's incredibly manipulative, but then again, we can see where she gets it from. I do feel like Tomie is a catalyst for the evil within us to come outward, and our own desires and our own jealousy to permeate and come outside of us. If we didn't have those developing in our subconscious, then she wouldn't have that much of an effect over people. But the issue is, I feel like everyone does have those feelings, or at least in the stories that are shown, these people have these feelings and desires, and that's why the stories exist, as showing a story where that wouldn't be prevalent. Maybe it would just be boring, or Junji Ito is giving off the message that we all have that kind of evil in us, while Uzumaki kind of shows how the spiral is a catalyst for the insanity and the inhumanity in all of us. Tomie is a catalyst for the vanity and the jealousy and the lust in all of us. A lot of people call Tomie a succubus, and it's easy to see why. She's seen as beautiful and she exudes a sexual air. She's presented as being incredibly promiscuous. The men will do anything for her, or they'll destroy her, and she will in turn come back and destroy them. She continues the cycle with which her undoing was initially created, and I feel like that essence of her character and her, essentially the creation of her as a demonic creature, is sad but incredibly poetic, because it is very true of society that what we do to women will always reflect on society, and it will carry on going round and round and round. Like, maybe I'm approaching this too much from a feminist perspective, but I just feel like as a woman, we see so many instances, or we've been a part of so many instances, where a man's selfishness or a man's jealousy or a woman's jealousy or a woman's selfishness comes in the way of our own happiness. In the heart of it all, Tomie is just a misguided girl, and we never get to see what she could have been because it was stripped away from her by a society which just doesn't want to see a beautiful woman or an independent woman or a woman who is confident within her own sexuality thrive. Yes, she was a teenager. Obviously, I'm not okay with the fact that a teacher did that with a student. Honestly, when I first finished Tomie and I was trying to compare it to Gyo and then later Uzumaki after I read that, I was trying to figure out why I just didn't understand why Tomie ended how it did. With Gyo and Uzumaki, you can definitely see that it's a character arc, but with Tomie, I just didn't understand, as it seemed that the other characters somewhat became the protagonist in the story of Tomie. We're looking at Tomie as a plot rather than a person or a character. It took me some time to realize that Tomie can't die because the injustices towards women will never die, and the desire for vanity will never die. Just like in Gyo, how the repercussions of humanity's actions against the environment will always have consequences, how in Uzumaki we can never stop nature or the natural cycle of things. Tomie also shows that there is no end to the suffering women endure to the hands of those around them, and we need to do better. Obviously, I've taken a very, very social, positive, like, oh my god, there's moral, guys, view to all of these stories, but if we're looking at things at face value, the gore, the slashiness, the blood, everything was so brilliant. From Tomie coming out of the ground from a huge blood splatter because of the plastic that's under the floorboard, to a huge shark coming out of the water with multiple legs, to a father turning himself into a huge spiral. These ideas are so mind-blowing and brilliant that no mind other than Junji Ito's could have invented these. And that level of ingeniousness is what makes Junji Ito's horror feel so, so fresh. These are stories where he will think of creative ways to inspire fear and claustrophobia. I genuinely think it's brilliant. Rather than playing on tropes of trypophobia or rape, or your very typical Saw-esque, torturing, Junji Ito looks at things from a completely different perspective, and he brings out those inner demons and those evils around us, or those creatures from a sci-fi setting or something paranormal into the world in a way that doesn't adhere to the established norms that we've seen, or at least those tropes that we've seen over and over again. I highly recommend checking out his work, and I absolutely loved these three. In the end, I feel like it's very important to look at horror as something that's not just meant to make you jump in your seat here and there, but it's something that's going to stay with you, something that's going to impact you, and a sense of unease that infiltrates your mind in a way that you never expected. That supply of artistic horror, that artistic integrity that especially comes within manga horror, is something that's awe-inspiring, that's something that's so static and stagnant that you can flip a page and come back to or just completely ignore. It's fascinating, and I really hope more of you do actually check out Junji Ito's works. He has so many amazing stories. Thank you so much for spending time with me, whether you like horror or not, or whether you will check out Junji Ito or not. I'm glad that we got to have this talk. If you want to have a conversation, pop it down below. Bye.